Well, good evening, folks, and welcome to the program. We'll have a few remarks and introductions here to get things started. We really appreciate you being here tonight. My name is Jason Dake. I am the Curator of Education here at Dennos Museum Center. As you can see, I am located inside the building. We are closed to the public at the moment, but we are actually open to the public now. We were closed for a bit. We just reopened this week, and we will continue to be open Sunday through Thursday. And the exhibition we're covering tonight, Michigan Modern, actually goes through the end of the month. So you still have a couple of weeks to come check it out in person if you are able and willing to do so. As you notice, we do require a mask for entry into the museum. And we ask that you follow distancing guidelines and that sort of thing. But we are happy to be open. We're excited to be able to share this exhibit as it closes. And we really appreciate you being here tonight. I feel like I need to take a moment to acknowledge that outside of the building and outside of our lives, there's a lot of strife and struggle going on right now. And so I just want to acknowledge that we're all glued to our screens and glued to the news and concerned for what is going on. And I appreciate that you're taking a moment from your days and your weeks to spend an hour with us to discuss something a little different and get a little bit of cultural learning under your belt. So I do appreciate that. Tonight, I am joined by James Haefner, who is the photographer for Michigan Modern, as well as Brian Conway, who is the historian that was involved in the project. And on the Dennos side, I have our executive director, Craig Hadley, and our audience engagement manager, Chelsea Nemi, because it really takes more than just one person to do these kinds of programs. So we welcome them all to be here. I'm looking forward to the conversation with James and Brian and a conversation with you all as well. For tonight, what we're going to do, I'm going to take you on a pretty brief walkthrough of the gallery just to give you a sense of what is here and talk a little bit about that. It will also give you a chance to warm up in the chat box there. I'll ask you a question and have you give you some answers as we move around. And then we'll hand it over to Brian to discuss some of the background of the project. And then of course, James to discuss some of the photography. I have some questions prepared. And you're not going to get a great view of everything, but then closer to the end of the program, we hope that you all will interact. But I wanted to give you a sense, if you haven't visited the exhibition, to get a sense of what it is like here in the museum. So we have our title wall with a great description of the project and the architects that are involved. Lots of famous names like Frank Lloyd Wright, Eli Saarinen, some other folks, and then maybe some lesser known architects. As you notice here, there is a book that is involved in this project that James and I were just discussing is apparently in high demand and short supply. So we'll work on that. As we enter the gallery, what we did is we worked with James he kind of picked out photos that he wanted to use for the exhibition. And he supplied us with that as probably 55, I think, is what he provided us initially. And then because of spacing concerns and that kind of thing, we had to limit it. So I think we have just about 50. But the nice thing is he included additional photographs on the labels. So when you actually count all of those photos, we have easily 100 plus images of modern architecture in the state of Michigan. And we have interiors and exteriors. There are residential buildings. There are places of education, like colleges and private schools. There are places of worship. There are places of business. We even have a building right here on our campus here at Northwestern Michigan College. So we will take a moment to discuss a little bit of that later on in the program. And they're very large format, which I think is really a great enhancement, over the book. As fantastic as the book is, these really large prints allow you to get a real close view of everything, to see a lot of detail that you maybe wouldn't see in the book, and really almost kind of make you feel like you're there. If I zoom in on this one, it really feels like you're able to step inside of the Hawkins Ferry house. There is a second small space back here, as many of our visitors will know, featuring more of the same kinds of photographs. And I wanted to take a moment here to have you kind of prime the chat box a little bit. Some of you I've noticed have found it. And what I'd like you to do is just pop into the chat box and provide a word or two to describe the kinds of things you're seeing in this architecture. Think of it as a way, if you had to describe modern architecture by using these photographs, what do you see? Is it materials or shapes or other kinds of things? Just kind of pop into the chat there, gives everybody a chance to figure out where that chat box is and comment, and that'll help you later on when we're doing Q&A. I see patterns, I see beautiful lines, clean. Geometry, light. Those two words apply really well to this one. Fitting their environment, yeah. There's actually a great example I'll pop over. I feel like this house really fits that idea of fitting the environment. It's literally fit into the ground. And that's Frank Lloyd Wright. So great. So now already just a few minutes in, many of you know a lot more about modern architecture than you probably did a few minutes ago. That's what I kind of use this for with some of the tours we've done, is just let people look and then tell me what they see, and they become a little bit more of an expert in terms of what modern architecture is. All right, so what I want to do next actually is kind of hand things over to Brian and James. I think Brian's going to go ahead and talk first, and he's going to give us a little bit of a background of where this project for Michigan Modern came from. I think hopefully he'll introduce himself, tell us a little bit about his really great career with the state of Michigan, and then we'll go from there. Brian?
Well, very good. Thank you, Jason. First of all, I want to congratulate Jim and you, Jason, and Craig for putting together just an excellent exhibition. I had the opportunity to see it earlier, and it is just beautiful. So I don't know if you all can see me on the screen or not, if there's anything I need to do, but I'll just start talking. It's great to be here. I'm actually speaking to you from Southern California, which is actually kind of coincidental because that's the beginning of the story of how I got involved with Michigan Modern. I was the State Historic Preservation Officer for the state of Michigan for over 20 years. And it was maybe 10, 15 years ago, I saw an exhibition that was occurring in Los Angeles, and the title of the exhibition was The Birth of Cool, or The Birth of Modernism. And I looked at the catalog for that exhibition, and the cover was entirely of Michigan products. And I went back to my staff and said, wait a minute, we've got to start claiming our own history here in Michigan. I'm trained as an architect. I know a little bit, or I know quite a bit about architectural history in Michigan. And I knew that Michigan had a strong role in the development of modernism, not only in architecture, but in all different types of modern design. So at the same time in the State Historic Preservation Office, we were seeing an underappreciation of architecture from that mid-century period, the mid-20th century. We knew just from our experience in preservation that people who don't understand the importance of something will not work to preserve it. So we took it upon ourselves to reclaim our story of Michigan's role in the development of modernism And that wound up to be a huge project that lasted well over 10 years. And what you're seeing in the exhibition and in the book is kind of the culmination of that project. But we started out, we hired a consultant to do some research for us and to identify properties throughout the state that we felt were outstanding or exemplified this particular period. And we discovered that the story was really deeper and richer than we had ever imagined. So we had all this information at our fingertips in our office in Lansing, and we decided that, you know what, this story is too important. We need to get it out to the public. So we did a couple of things. Back in 2013, we launched a major exhibition at the Cranbrook Art Museum in Bloomfield Hills, together with a national symposium where we invited experts from across the country to come and talk about Michigan's role in the design industry. That was very, very well received. It exceeded our expectations. We were identified in the Wall Street Journal and New York Times, and suddenly people were starting to look at Michigan in a new light. We then followed in 2014, moving that exhibition over to the Grand Rapids Art Museum and held a second exposition as well as a symposium in conjunction with the Kendall College of Art and Design. And it was at that exhibition where we had participants from all over the country, including several people from Palm Springs, California, associated with Modernism Week, which some of you may be familiar with. It's an international event that's held every spring where people from all over the world come to talk about modern architecture. It was kind of funny because I've had two guys following me around all the 3-day symposium, and finally they corralled me and said, we need you to come to California to speak at Modernism Week. So in 2015, I was honored with the task of putting together an entire day on Michigan architecture and Michigan modern design. So I invited several of my colleagues and friends to come out with me to California to do a one-day presentation, which I've been told was one of their most popular and successful days in the entire 13 or 15-year experience of Modernism Week. Subsequent to that, I was invited back every year for the next 5 or 6 years to do presentations. Then we published our first book called Michigan Modern Design That Shaped America, which was a compilation of essays or papers from those symposiums. And about that time, about 2013, Jim, you may remember this, you came to see me in Lansing, cold call, we'd never met. You came in and brought a portfolio of your photographs, and I was bowled over by it. And that kind of established our long-term friendship and working relationship. We used a number of Jim's photographs in the first book. This, if you can see, this is the first book. Oops, it might be backwards. I guess it is backwards on the screen, but which includes one of Jim's photographs on the cover, as well as Jim's photographs on the back cover. This was the first book, and that was an immediate success. And then Jim, I guess over lunch sometime, Jim suggested the idea of putting together a second book focusing on the photography that was to exemplify the architecture throughout the state. So that's how we got going on that second book. We were able to raise a substantial amount of money. I should emphasize that all of this work was funded through private fundraising. We received major grants from the General Motors Foundation, from the Eleanor and Edsel Ford Foundation, and the list goes on, Kresge Foundation, et cetera. So we were very lucky in being able to raise money as we were telling the story, which was part of an effort, a broader effort to kind of change the image of Michigan as we were in the 90s, in the early 2000s without such a great image here in Michigan. But I'm very pleased to see that it was a huge success, and I still, I'm still asked to come out and speak about it. I've been all over the country speaking about it. So I think we've been successful in getting people to understand what Michigan's role. So here I am in California, and there's a huge connection between Michigan and California. But I will add that my home is right there in Northwest Michigan. For those of you up in Traverse City, I live outside of Onekama in Manistee County, so not too far from Traverse City there. But the connection between Michigan and California is very strong. They both really boomed during the 20th century. Both are very auto-centric. There was a lot of back and forth between designers, architects, back and forth between California and Michigan. So it was a natural connection. So I'm pleased to say at this point, I think we've made the case that Michigan really was the birth of cool, not necessarily California. So I guess I'll leave it at that, and we can take questions. I'll turn it over to Jim to talk specifically about the photography. I guess I would like to say Jim and I worked very carefully on identifying properties to include in the book. And those of you who have seen the book, you probably say, gee, I know such and such a building that should have been included, wasn't included, why wasn't it included, those kinds of questions. It was a difficult task. We started out with a list of over 100 buildings that we thought were significant. And of course, a book of 100 buildings would have been, impossible to carry around. So we had to whittle it down. We whittled it down based on wanting to represent Michigan architects, as well as international architects that came into the state of Michigan to practice and design buildings. We also wanted to have geographic distribution as much as we could. And then it got down to owner permission. So in some cases, people did not want their properties photographed, which, that's their right, obviously. In other cases, it came down to the condition of a property. I remember Jim telling me at one case, several different cases, he'd go out and look at a property and say, well, no, you know what, that needs to be painted, or the bushes are too big, or whatever. So we did cut some out because of condition. But I think in the end, we had just a wonderful collection. We also decided to start the book in the late 1920s with the beginnings at Cranbrook, because Cranbrook is so important to the Michigan story as well as the national story of modernism, and conclude it with, at the time, was one building that I thought was very significant, and that is the MSU Museum by Zaha Hadid. So it actually goes beyond mid-century, but I think it's important to show that some of the design aesthetic that was developed in the mid-century carries on into the 21st century. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Jim.
All righty. Brian's recollection is pretty darn accurate, but he left out one minor occasion where he'd been in Los Angeles, and I think one of his sons gave him a book called LA Modern. And that's what really got us thinking about doing a program that is similar to that. And so we were able to find the funding for it, and that was what is the most important part of it. I mean, it was an ambitious project from the get-go. I photographed 34 locations over a period of 3 years. It was definitely the opportunity of a lifetime for a photographer. I was so fortunate, and especially one who loves modern design and architectural photography as I do. I put together the budget. That was one of the things, the advantageous parts of my position was that I not only took the pictures, but I put together the budget. So we had helicopters, we had lifts, we had anything that we needed to make the best picture of these properties that I could. And I wasn't rushed in any means at all. I took my time. I was at some locations for 2 or 3 days, and it allowed me to capture what the designer meant for the viewer to see. It was just a wonderful project to be part of. So the book, I think in all, I shot around 1,200 pictures of these 34 locations over a period of 3 years. I fitted in between my normal advertising work and other architectural work. And it was just incredible. But of the 1,200 pictures, we narrowed it down to the 227 that are found in Michigan Modern and Architectural Legacy. And we have a video that we will run through in about 1.5 minutes. You'll see all 227 images. So maybe now's a good time, Craig, to do that. And if you guys know the song by Aretha Franklin, Pink Cadillac, I think it is. Anyhow, it goes to that beat, but we can't play it right now with the music. And hit it. Yeah, this is all the pictures that you'll find in the book in the order that they are printed. I kind of miss the music.
Yeah, I was gonna say, we could all sing along in our heads, right? I think that this might be a good time too to mention the website, right? Because a lot of this information and some of these photos are actually contained in michiganmodern.org. Really
Right.
a great, fantastic website resource that people can visit later on.
Absolutely. And what's interesting, they have a real estate section too. So if you're interested in purchasing a home that's designed like this, they have a good collection that they update on a regular basis. So the book is arranged chronologically as well. So we're getting close to the end. And there's the pink Cadillac. All right. So that's all 227 images found in the book. And of those, I picked 55 to be printed for the exhibit. And I'm very proud of the exhibit. And I also want to take a moment here to thank Craig and Jason and Chelsea for all their efforts in making this a success. I visited the exhibit in October. It went up in September, but I wasn't able to get up there. I was working on something, but when I did see it, I just thought it was as good as it could be. I'm thrilled with it, and I hope you guys get a chance to go see it. Let's see, what I wanted to talk about are the 34 locations. I guess I can talk a bit about how the project evolved. In 2015, when I started photographing the locations, I had helicopters and lifts and what have you in our budget, and I utilized them the first year. But after that, I found that the drones that were being produced at the time could give me almost as good of quality of an image as the cameras I was using on lifts or from a helicopter, and the cost is so much less that it doesn't make sense to go that way anymore. So that was a change that happened in 2016. But I photographed, I'd say about a third of each project each year. And the first year I did shoot the shoot at Cranbrook, which I think I spent 3 days at. And I photographed Richard Meyer's Douglas House that first year. And I'd never been in the Douglas House before. I'd driven by it, and you're gonna go find that, Jason? It's that White House on the water. You know that one?
Yeah, I was going to Cranbrook, and then you switched
Cranbrook?
it up on me. So
We
do have it.
Past one. Here's Cranbrook on the left. In fact, all three of those are Cranbrook, aren't they?
Yep.
So the interior, that interior is the Saarinen house, and that just blew me away as well. I'd never been in the residence before, and this is kind of a row of houses in Cranbrook. From the outside, they look virtually the same, but when you go into the Saarinen's home, it's so different than anything I'd ever seen before. I mean, look at the tapestries, the design of the furniture, the tile on the fireplace. I mean, these people were totally immersed in design. I mean, it's just an incredible place to live. The picture to the left is one of my favorites, and it's an unexpected photograph. I don't think it was something I planned in advance, but I really love the graphics of it with the silhouetted trees and the reflection in the water. I took my time on all these. Nothing was rushed. The picture of the auditorium on the left is another one of my favorites. And, that shows the forward thinking of Elia Saarinen. Those light fixtures are phenomenal. That's indirect light. The bulbs are facing upwards. They're in the housing, suspended from the middle of the half dome there, and the light is bounced up into the dome and then reflects back down to the surface. It's and if you look at the design on the curtains, it's phenomenal as well. Cranbrook was incredible, and it still is. I am very close to Cranbrook. I used to practice my photography there. When I didn't have something to shoot, I'd go to Cranbrook and just walk around and take pictures. It's been an important part of my life. Then we're getting a good look at some of the information cards as well. That was Brian's idea, and I thought it turned out to be an excellent suggestion, because we were able to double the amount of images that we can show. And give people a fuller experience of modern design in Michigan. And that's what this show is all about. We're trying to continue the Michigan modern experience for a number of years. This is, I hope, will become a traveling exhibit. It already is going to the Saginaw Valley Marshall Fredericks Museum in April. But I hope that it continues for many years, because it will communicate to the viewer the wonderful architecture that we have in the state. Now, what we're looking at here is 3 projects that I'd never seen before the exhibit, or before I started shooting the project. The Hawkins Ferry house just blew me away. I've been back there several times. I actually now am working with the owners of the house. They have a gallery in Detroit called the Library Street Collective, which is very forward thinking in their approach to art. And anyhow, but this is William, who was it, Brian?
Kessler. William Kessler.
Kessler, yeah, William Kessler. And it just is a phenomenal residence, inside and out. And then the house on to the left of that is in Ada, Michigan. And that's called the Devin House. And the Devin was a entrepreneur, came from a family on the western side of Michigan who was in the packaged foods industry, as I recall, and then found an architect in Chicago who was Mies van der Rohe's nephew, as I recall. Of course, his name doesn't jump out at me. Well, Dirk Lohan, thank you.
Yes.
And I spent 2 days, I believe, at this house. It's pretty special. I mean, in the book you'll have each project that I photographed. You'll find about 6 or 7, 8 pages of photography on each location, and so I think the book really does a good job of describing what each location looks like. But the Devin House is very cool. And then the one to the left, I'd never been to either. That's the performing it's in Ann Arbor. It's the Power Center, yes. And that was designed by Kevin Roach, who worked with Saarinen for many years until he passed away. That was Errol Saarinen. So again, I was just like a kid in the candy store when I'd walk into these places. They just were wonderful experiences. And, I'd get there early in the morning. I wouldn't leave until after dark, as this picture was shot at nighttime. So anyhow, the photography portion of this was really the pinnacle of my career, and having that opportunity, and now having the opportunity to exhibit it is another pinnacle. I mean, I'm very fortunate. I've had a long career, and I'm still working, but I'm very fortunate that I get to photograph things that I love.
Jim, you mentioned a different approach to each kind of thing, in terms of using cranes and drones. Is there one that's in the gallery here that you kind of remember being a particularly tough shoot?
The Douglas House is there. Where's the Douglas House? That's the Meyer project, because there's a good story about the Douglas House I don't see it in there. That's the interior of there's the Douglas House. Yeah, you'll see the entry, and that's the interior. So I arrived at the Douglas House walked in. You enter at the top. You see the blue door. That's the entrance to the home, and it's across a little cantilevered bridge. And you walk in, and that picture to the left is what you see. You're at the top of the structure, and you're looking out over Lake Michigan, and the light was absolutely gorgeous. It was a beautiful day, and I was really there to shoot a lot of quick reference so that I could study it and come back with a plan to photograph the house in a more official manner. But I threw that concept away and said, I think I'm going to get right at it, and started taking these pictures. In fact, that house on the left, or that shot on the left, was shot 5 minutes after I walked into the place. But then we also had a helicopter scheduled to show up, and I don't know if it was the same day or the following day. And Brian came up for that. He wanted to see the Douglas House. Had you seen it before then, Brian?
Yes, yeah. I had been there. In fact, I can tell you a little bit about my first experience there. It was okay. I had the opportunity to visit it before with the previous owner.
Okay.
And it's one of those experiences where you walk in, and you're walking in at the top level, and the house literally drops down below you, and it's very ship-like in that it forces you or gives you a feeling that you're being projected out over the water. It's really quite remarkable.
Yes.
And I've said, those of you, I know we have a lot of people listening who know a lot about architecture, but I think really good architecture hits you emotionally. And this one absolutely does. You get just this tremendous sensation the moment you walk in the door.
Yeah, it's such an impressive structure. And so the helicopter experience, we got to share with the owners. I photographed the owners from the helicopter, as a matter of fact, and I'm not sure if there's a picture of them in the book or not, but I've become good friends with the owners of the house, and a few of the other homeowners, and I stay in touch as well. Yeah, there is that is a drone shot there that we have in the informational card. But anyhow, it was a wonderful experience, to say the least. And you see it, on that peninsula off of 119 north of Bay or Harbor Springs. And
and Jim, you missed the best part of that experience was pizza on the top deck at sunset.
That's right. We got some pizza and had some red wine and watched the sun go down. I've a year ago, just over a year ago, right now, I was up there photographing it in the winter too, and it's a striking white home in a white field of snow-covered trees. I've been fortunate enough to capture that as well. So,
well, Jim, I feel like maybe we have the answer, but Andrea did ask a question through the chat, and she was curious for both you and Brian if there's a house maybe in the exhibition or in the book at least that you would like to live in. If if you just kind of magically you could pick which one you'd live in, would it be the Douglas house or would it be a different one?
There's so many. I mean, I love all the homes that I photographed, and that would be a tough choice to make. The Douglas house would be awesome, but the Hawkins Ferry house is incredible. The Frank Lloyd Wright, the Turkel house is out of this world. That's incredible. There's some great shots of that at the exhibit. In fact, the exhibit does cover, I've included at least one image of each project that I shot, and in many cases more, but it's really, the exhibit, I think, tells the story of modern design in Michigan very well.
Brian, do you have anyone that jumps out to you right away that you'd want to pick?
Well, yeah, that's a really difficult question, but I think what strikes me about it is there's such a variety of the houses, from small houses to very elaborate houses. But I think, and some of them are very, very formal, and some are very much more casual. So I would be hard pressed to pick any one as my favorite because I love them all. But
well, it is Michigan. I mean, everybody has two houses, right?
Yeah, right. That crossed my mind.
Yes.
The house up north that knocked me out, though, was definitely the Douglas house.
Well, I wanted to take a few minutes and kind of focus in on a couple of buildings and a couple of questions that I had for you guys. And then while I'm doing that, I'll encourage folks to hop in to ask some questions that we'll get to. We do have a really great crowd. I think we have 40 people here hanging out. And if you're able to see the Q&A chat, that makes it a little easier for us to keep track of which questions we've answered. But if you did put something into the chat, we'll try to keep an eye on that as we go through. But again, if you see that Q&A there on your screen, if you have a question, you can put it in there and then we'll know that we need to get to it. But I got a few ones that I want to kind of bring to your attention and kind of ask some questions. And I'm actually going to share my screen with the photos, so it's a little easier for everyone to see. Let me see. Actually, I can do all four. Let's see how that works. So, of course, I have to play favorites with our local option there. So this is the Fine Arts Building here on the campus of Northwestern Michigan College. And it's known as the Shirley Okestrom Fine Arts Building. And really for me, as a person who teaches art and has worked in a space very much like this, I was just curious about some of the logistical aspects of, frankly, shooting probably the messiest space that you should have had to photograph. I don't know if anything else was this messy because it's a clay studio.
Right.
It's meant to be messy. There's always dust everywhere. There's always stuff on drying racks. There's, you can see in the photo that there's works up on the ledge and that kind of thing. So I was curious about your experience with this particular room, trying to make sure that it's prepped correctly. I mean, did you talk to the faculty ahead of time, or did you show up and start moving some things around? I was just curious about that.
Well, Jason, my job is to simplify what I'm looking at in many instances. And I'm sure that on the far side of a lot of those tables are a lot of things that I took off the tables just so they wouldn't distract the viewer from the picture or the architecture. I do believe I was there when school was not in session. So that might have made my job a little easier.
Sure.
But it was, the pottery studio by definition is going to be kind of dirty. So we did straighten it up quite a bit, as I recall.
Yeah. And was this your first, when you came to photograph this, had you been to the building before?
No, I hadn't. And I love this room, and I love there's a music room too, as I recall, that I thought was spectacular. And I spent a lot of time photographing the exteriors of the buildings too.
Yeah. And for those folks who maybe don't know the history, I mean, this building predated the museum, but was sort of the inspiration behind it. So this idea of a fine arts building that contained visual arts studios and some space for showing art, but also having the musical side of fine arts in the same building. Similar kind of thought process came to the Dennos, right? So that we have galleries, but we also have an auditorium to display and do performances. So kind of a fun kind of connection between these two buildings that look very differently, but have that same focus on multiple disciplines. So the next one I wanted to look at, and Brian actually brought this up. I was going to kind of ask about this, and then Brian kind of brought it in that the Broad Museum is not necessarily an example of modern architecture, but it has connections to the history of modern architecture. And so I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that. For those who have never been to the Broad Museum at Michigan State University, there are no walls that are straight, right? Every wall is angled in some way. So there are no 90-degree angles, which as a museum person, it sounds like a nightmare, but the staff there is very creative and very good at what they do, and they find ways to install work. But it didn't strike me as something that I would compare to modern architecture in the same way that many of these other buildings do. So I wondered, Brian, if you wanted to elaborate on that, just to kind of help folks understand sort of the differences.
Sure. Well, as Jim and I were putting together the list of buildings, I really felt that this was a real important building, just like the building that you showed before there on your campus, the art building, because of the architects that were involved. In the case of the building, the building there on your campus, not only is it a beautiful building, but it's important that it was the architects that were involved with it, the architects collaborative. Many people wouldn't even think of them having a building here in Michigan or doing a building here in Michigan, but it was a result of, I believe it was one of the trustees there at the university had a connection to this architectural firm, Architects Collaborative out of Boston area. And that architectural firm is including well-known names such as Walter Gropius, is a very important architectural firm in the history of architecture, as is Zaha Hadid, the architect of this building. And the fact that we here in Michigan have a building designed by Zaha Hadid is very, very significant. So I felt it would be a real oversight if we did not include this very important building. A little bit of backstory on the building. I at the time I was living in East Lansing, so I was following what was happening, and MSU actually held a competition, architectural competition, to select an architect, and they narrowed it down to 5 architects and their proposals, and then they allowed the community to review those proposals, see the models, see the drawings, and then vote as a community which one we thought was the best for our community. I'm proud to say I voted for this one, but it created a lot of controversy in the community. Also, even though it was the one that most people voted for, it's obviously very, very, very different and very stark, and particularly in comparison with the more traditional mid-century buildings on the campus there. It's completely different. But the architect had a vision, as did the community. The community wanted to connect the campus to the downtown area in a more significant way. And this is at one of the major entrances to the campus. So she actually looked at that site and saw that it over the decades, there were pathways leading from the campus to the downtown. So she took that theme of pathways and incorporated it into the building, which is represented by these folds in the metalwork on the exterior of the building. So there is some rationale for why it looks like it is.
Yeah.
But you're right. It's another one of those buildings, in my opinion, is you cannot ignore it. It is a site on the street. When you walk in, again, you are struck emotionally because there are no walls that are perpendicular. Some will like it, some won't, but I will tell you, when I walked into it, I was overwhelmed, but at the same time, I got dizzy. So it definitely strikes you one way or another. But it's definitely, because it's there on the campus, people from all over the country come to see just this building.
Yeah, I mean, if you're not familiar with Zaha Hadid, she has buildings all over the world. Unfortunately, she passed away maybe 3 or 4 years ago. To have a design of hers in Michigan is wonderful for the state. And this building, while not even close to one of her biggest commissions, is really a gem. And visit it for the architecture, visit it to see what's inside. I don't think you'll be disappointed. And
it does have connections to the history of modern architecture, right? Because it's using those materials, the sort of raw materials. On the outside, you're seeing this sort of metal material, a lot of sharp lines, clean lines, inventive use of light. So there's definitely all of those elements involved in the design of it.
Yeah, I mean, I consider this modern in any, this is very modern. It's not mid-century modern though, which is the, kind of the difference between what we were concentrating on for the majority of the book. We didn't want to stop in 1970 with our subject matter because we thought it wouldn't tell a complete story about modern design in Michigan. Modern design back in the 50s was not called mid-century modern design. It was just called modern design. So you have to keep that in perspective. We call it mid-century modern now because that was 70 years ago. So modern design continued in Michigan, and this is a prime example. The other home or another project that I photographed that is about the same time when it was designed and built is the Dressner home in Birmingham. It's much different than this. It's concrete, four sides, a cube of concrete, basically, and very controversial, but still very modern. And I love that house. I mean, I lived there too. Linda's house is wonderful. So,
yeah. You actually point out something that I think is interesting. If you look at this building, you look at the Dressner house, you look at the Devin House, and several others that you photographed, they're like pieces of sculpture.
Yeah.
That particularly that Devin House and the way you captured that photograph, it's like a cube, a sculptural cube that was dropped into
a landscape,
open landscape.
Yeah.
No way. This building also, it feels so foreign that it was just kind of dropped in there like a giant sculpture.
Yeah. It is impressive. Uh, and let me make a comment about the photography. So when I take a picture of a building, I don't just walk up and stand there and take a picture. I think about it and I place the camera on a tripod, and I'll leave that camera and tripod in place for several hours. I mean, it could be all day, 12, 14 hours. It could be 7 hours. It could be 3 hours. But that way I can take pictures of the building in different lighting conditions. So when you're standing there in the sunlight, like I photographed the exterior of the building, you cannot see the lights on inside really. So I kind of emphasize different aspects of the design by combining pictures that were shot at different times of the day. And it's something we wouldn't be able to do in the past before digital capture. And we're fortunate to have that opportunity now.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, but you're right. You wouldn't be able to see those bright lights with the bright white ceiling there at this time during the day. And the building itself changes colors a lot because it's that gray color. It reflects whatever color is around it. So
Yep.
sunsets and different seasons can impact the way you see the building.
Absolutely, it's a chameleon, basically.
Yeah, I have one other building I wanted to spend some time with. This is a house. And I thought we could talk a little bit about, this was one because I saw in the exhibition, we have two photos of it really close to each other. And we have an exterior and an interior. And this is the, forgive me, Alexander Gerard house, correct?
Right.
Designed house. And so I was curious about some of that aspect of when you come upon a house and residence like this, when you're choosing your shots, did you get a front door shot of every single house, and then you only included certain ones? And then something like this, where you're interior, but you're capturing, I mean, a third of the photograph is just a brick wall, right? And it's a beautiful brick wall, but it sort of cuts the image into thirds, which is kind of interesting. So just wanted to have you talk a little bit about some of your compositional processes.
I respond to what I see, and I want to make pictures that have impact to the viewer. So if the front door is impressive, then I'll photograph it. And if there are glazed bricks on the interior that are yellow and reminiscent of the glazed bricks that you'll find at the GM Tech Center, I'll emphasize those as well. What I'm trying to do when I take these pictures is emphasize what I think the designer's intention is when he chose to put a material in at one spot of the house, or had you see the light coming in on the floor on the right side. I mean, that was important in his philosophy of the design of the house and placement of the windows so that it would light up the interior of the home. That I try to make pictures that have impact. I'm not just recording what is there. I'm making conscious decisions about what is going to describe this house the best to the viewer. And I apparently do it halfway decently because people seem to like my work. But yeah, this is the McLucas house, isn't it, Brian?
Yeah. Yep.
Yes.
Yeah. So this is the only Alexander Gerard home that's still in existence, and the story behind it and its renovation and the owners is really wonderful. They're patrons of the arts, and they didn't really know what they were getting into when they bought the house, which is not an uncommon story, by the way. The owners of the Douglas house didn't know anything about Richard Meyer when they bought the Douglas house, and it kind of these homes take on a life of their own, and the owners have no other choice but to ride along and make sure that the house is renovated in the spirit that it was designed, and give the opportunity for anybody who visits to have that original experience. So most of the owners of all these homes have been very careful to make sure they renovated the houses in a accurate manner to the original design.
And with
I don't
this
know if
house in
I don't know if I
particular,
answered your question, Jason, but maybe I did.
yeah, no, that's all right. I was curious too. Was this a one-day shoot, or did you go back multiple
I think
times?
this was a one-day shoot. I got there early, and it's over in Grosse Pointe. It's not that far from my house, but I was there, probably about 16 hours, 14 to 16 hours. That's one day in my lifetime.
Sure. And kind of along those lines of that question, Andrea commented that you make your presence felt, which makes the work more personal. And I think that's absolutely right. When you look at a photo like this, it really feels like I'm standing in this entranceway on my way walking up to the front door.
Yeah.
You get a sense of the mood to it that I think is really nice.
Yeah, you're in awe. I mean, when I visit these homes, I'm in awe because in this case, I hadn't been to the house before, and it's overwhelming sometimes to see this beautiful design. And
Brian, I don't know if you know much about the history with this house in terms of that renovation, but I actually was looking. There's a great video on YouTube. So if they just want to Google Gerard House, there's a wonderful video that goes through the house and it talks to the owners. And I just was curious, in terms of those renovations and the things people go through, if you have a story either about this house or another one in the exhibition.
Well, that's a good question. First, I just want to comment about this photograph. I think it's wonderful because, the fence is coming out at you, but at the same time, the fence is drawing you into the house. And if you flip to the interior photograph, you see how that fence then penetrates through the wall right into the house. There you see the background coming right into the house.
Oh, sure.
Was architect's way of drawing you right in. And Jim mentioned the importance of those brick walls, the colored bricks. There's multiple colored brick walls in this house because Alexander Gerard was working with Eero Saarinen on the design of the General Motors Technical Center and had access to some of the materials that were being used during that major construction. And we thought it was important to include this house, not only because the house itself is wonderful, but because of the architect Alexander Gerard. Many people don't, they may know of Alexander Gerard as an extremely important designer in the world of graphics and textiles, but many people don't realize that he was an architect as well. He lived in Detroit, had a store in, I believe it was in Grosse Pointe, actually lived in the Grosse Pointe area, and designed a number of houses in Grosse Pointe. Unfortunately, this is the last remaining, I believe, of 5 or 6 that existed there at one point. So it's also a good example of how these houses, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, they were throwaway houses, and we still see this going on. We'll see a house like this being advertised for sale. Someone will come in and say, you know what, I like that site. I'm going to tear down the house and build a new one. So part of our effort from the Historic Preservation Office was to emphasize that these houses are important to preserve because they tell the story of art and architecture in Michigan. Back to your question of the restorations or renovations of the house, I think the best story that comes to mind is again back to that Douglas house up near Harbor Springs, where, as you saw in the photographs, it had all of that glass overlooking Lake Michigan. But what you might not understand is all of that glass is overlooking the lake on a very, very steep hillside. It's a dramatic drop from the entranceway on the right there down to the shoreline. So all of that glass, you just can't get at it from the front side or the water side. So they actually had a crane that would come in at the road, go up over the house. They had to replace several of those large panes of glass. and then, lift with this crane, lift the glass up over the house, and then the new windows back over the house into place. So it was all done kind of like a giant robot arm reaching over the top of the house. I was amazed. Another story there, if you look at the photograph of the walkway to the front door, you see on the right there, you see all of the metalwork throughout the house is reminiscent of ship architecture. They had that metal railway or guardrail along this bridge to the front door, and it's literally a bridge going from the street side to the front door. And the bridge over the years had been had deteriorated, so they needed to rebuild the bridge, but they knew if they took it off completely, they would have to meet current codes, and that kind of a railing, which acts as a step ladder, would not meet current codes. So what they did is they actually suspended that railing in the air as they rebuilt the floor of that walkway, and thus were able to keep that railing in place. So like many of the owners of these properties, they went over and above in making sure that the original design intent was maintained in the project.
Yeah, I mean, it just the amount of work involved in that, it just sounds amazing. I was trying to find one last kind of image. We don't have a lot of folks in the Q&A, but I wanted to find another image because I think it's important for us to talk about this. And I think I'm going to go with this one, even though I'm not sure of the actual designer. And Craig, I don't know if you could make sure that people can see this while Brian and Jim are talking, but I wanted to talk about furniture, right? And so many of these homes in particular, but also some of the office buildings even, the labels talk about, the Herman Miller and the Eames and all of these well-known furniture designers that are also Michigan-based, that are also modernist designs. And I think that's important that, these houses, a lot of these houses would look very strange with your typical sort of, lazy boy sofa chair in them, right? So the furniture is designed to fit within the space. And I'm curious if you wanted to talk a little bit about, that both Jim and Brian, about, when you visit these places and the people who own the residences and how they've furnished them and maybe made a point of sticking within that aesthetic.
Sure, I can comment on that very briefly, and I failed to talk about this as I gave my introduction, but Michigan was so important because of what was happening here in Michigan. We had the industry, we had the auto industry and the furniture industry. We had the educational institutions with Cranbrook and the University of Michigan being one of the first schools of architecture to start practicing modern design or teaching modern design. And the particular furniture that you're showing right there was designed by designers for the Herman Miller Company. Many of those designers came out of Cranbrook and then designed furniture that became, that furniture that you're seeing, particularly the wired chairs and the Noguchi glass table there, those were actually designed in the 1950s. But you look at them today and they're kind of timeless. They're so clean and simple and modern, they're timeless. And that kind of furniture you would see in architectural magazines from the 50s and 60s as properties were being promoted or architects were promoting their work. So it's amazing to think that that furniture is still being produced out of a company here in Michigan. And this is the kind of thing, as I mentioned earlier, was being promoted as coming out of California. No, it's not coming out of California, it's coming out of Michigan.
Yeah.
But you're right, it's, part of the aesthetic that you see in a house like this is a result of the furnishing that they're using. And out of that picture, I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, at least 5 pieces that are from a Michigan, or 6, including that hanging lamp, that are from a Michigan company.
Yeah, I think the homeowners, if you're going to live in a significant mid-century modern home designed by, in this case, Gunnar Burkertz, you're going to furnish it in with appropriate designs of the time. it just makes sense. And I don't think any of the homes that I photographed, uh, the homeowners had any intention of doing anything but that. Um, I can't think of one home that wasn't furnished with authentic furniture of the time.
Sure. We did have a Q&A in the box here. Dirk is asking if either of you are familiar with the book Where Today Meets Tomorrow by Susan Skarsgård,
Well, yes,
which is a
yes, we
pictorial
are.
history, of the GM
Yeah.
Center, Tech Center.
That's a wonderful book. And I don't know if Susan's visiting with us today or not. I sent her a link, but yeah, that's a great book. Susan worked at the Tech Center for many years and was their archivist. And let's see, the cover, I have to put in a plug. The cover was shot by me. I shot it on a project for Smith Group many years ago. But yes, yeah, we're both familiar with the Susan and the book. She's a good friend and the book is wonderful.
Yes, it's a great book, and I don't know if Susan's listening in, but I will give her kudos. She was one of my main contacts, or my only contact there at General Motors Technical Center in Warren, and she did a great job of getting people in to see it. And of course, the book itself is very well done.
She is here, yes.
Hi, Susan.
Hi, Susan.
That's great. Well, I think we're kind of, coming towards the end of our momentum here in the discussion, and I want to thank everybody again for your wonderful attendance and for questions. It looks like actually we have one last question. Can you say more about how architecture intersects with academic disciplines, other academic disciplines? And yeah,
that's not my forte. Maybe Brian.
As a student.
Well, I'm not sure if the questioner is talking about today or in the mid-century, but there was a lot of in the mid-century there was a lot of crossover in disciplines, and the best example of that is Cranbrook itself, where the philosophy was you weren't just there to study architecture, you were there to study all of the arts. And then
sure.
as we see things unfolding, if we look at the auto industry, for example, architecture was important in the promotion of automobiles. We see, even today, we see how important architecture is in the promotion of automobiles, whether it's trying to display the automobiles as very futuristic or very traditional. But architecture plays an important part in backdrops for those types of advertisements. I wanted to just give one more plug for Jim. Those of you who are interested, Jim graciously donated several of his prints to Modernism Week out of Palm Springs, and they will be doing an online auction starting February 1st of both. I think there's 4 of Jim's prints together with 4 of the Michigan Modern books. So if you're really interested, you can go online and bid on those.
That's right. That's right.
MichiganModern.org, I believe. Or not Michigan, I'm sorry, ModernismWeek.com or Modernism Week. Just Google Modernism Week and I'm sure you'll find it.
No.
That's great. Yeah, any last thoughts, Jim?
I just hope that this show continues for many years. That was my intention when I printed all these images, and I want to take a second to thank the people that helped me put this exhibit together. I thank Craig and Jason and Chelsea, but I worked with some suppliers. The framing company was wonderful. They're called International Molding, but they just did a tremendous job putting this thing together. I made all the prints. It's something I enjoy doing and have the technology to handle. But no, I don't have, I just hope that this exhibit continues and is shown for many more years.